and by which point in time I'm in probation. And what we were able to do was that I'd generated some independent cash, and my boss at probation said, just have it and start to invest in this thing that you're doing. And we did these really unusual, when I think about them, they were incredibly unusual events. So for about 2.5 years, we just held this space where it was essentially an agendaless space. We brought people together in monthly, 10, 15 people would come together for a little 2-hour meeting. We'd have tea and cakes, and we'd just discuss all things recovery, however we wanted to discuss that. And then every kind of 4 or 5 months, we would have these really big events where we try and get 50, 60 people in a room, where even 100 people in a room, where 70% of the people in that room were people with lived experience. They weren't professionals. Yes, they you know, active users and stuff like that. And we struck on this beautiful formula that if you wanted all these people to turn up, you just provided them with, we found 2 or 3 things that just made this stuff work. You gave them curry and cake. Curry and cake, it's a winner. Yes, curry and cake. Yeah. My advice to anyone who wants to really garnish a lot of people in a lot of space, it doesn't cost you much money. Just get some curry and cake, and you know. We also used to run all of these events, which said there was a we included what was called a no fag break rule. In other words, anyone in that room that was feeling difficult, anxious, or needed to go outside for a smoke just got up and walked away. You just went in and out, which was obviously, we knew that if you sat people down for these 2-hour conversations, you lost their, if they were thinking about something else, you know, so we accommodated all of that in the space. And some very exciting things happened out of it. And clearly the most exciting thing that happened out of it was that we had one of these events and we had 3 people on a table, Sarah, Donna and Hugh, who all over on Anglesey, and they just said, we need to set up our own organisation. And they went away and set up what then became AGRO, which became the forerunner to North Wales recovery community and all that sort of stuff. So we can see the origins of all of that journey. But we had a lot of people that came into the room that got the bug for doing things differently. There's a lad in, we used to have these storytelling events, and there's a lad who's still working today in the Denbighshire area, and he still to this day just holds spaces where people can tell their story in a group, which is just the same element that you have in AA or NA, but to all people with that. So we developed, we just had this brilliant space and ran it for many years. We put some of that money up into the more formal organisation, Recovery Academy, that we set up as a charity, the likes of Tim, David, me, Rowdy, I don't think who else was on the whatever. And then when it stopped and collapsed, all the money came back to North Wales and we got to spend it on other things and stuff like that. And it was important, that stuff. We realised the need that you had to have at least some money, and you got to have some money to do things differently, but you don't always need big pots. My time at probation, I was really fortunate. I went to my boss and I could realise what was going on for the team in trying to construct orders, and we'd already got 25, 30 staff. And I remember going to the team saying, look, I can recruit for a couple of posts, or I can hold on to this 80,000, 90,000 pound pot, and I'll let you make claims on it to support your individuals. So we did that at the same time. That was very radical. So we'd have people like who, 2 examples I'll give you of that, how radical that was. We had someone that really wanted to take up an accommodation offer, but couldn't because they couldn't have their dog with them to start with. And we paid just for their dog to go to kennels at night. So we had the dog with him all day on the streets. And then at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the evening,
that's wonderful.
You know, and another example was we'd got a guy who'd come out of prison. He'd used loads and loads of drugs, you know, and he got a load of qualifications. And in the worker he was working with, and he said, "Well, I've got offers of work. I'm going to work tomorrow." And that's clearly the best thing for me. And well, what work do you do? Well, I'm a qualified asbestos remover. But when I got sent down for the drugs, all my breathing equipment disappeared with the flat. And I can't get a job if I haven't got my own breathing equipment. And we just bought him 800 quid's worth of breathing equipment. And instantly he went from an unemployed person on a probation order for 2 years for someone for the next 2 years who just worked flat out during that order. And, you know, so there were lots of, I'm giving you snippets really, David, because there's obviously a lot to tell, and we're doing these smaller interviews, but that's the kind of stuff that was going on. People were doing some very radical thinking. We were doing radical thinking in terms of trying to support advocacy agencies. That was the most difficult. People went out their way to try and close down those agencies and succeeded in the end. Didn't really like that stuff. We provided a fertile environment.
Sorry, I wasn't quite clear on that. Can you just step back there?
Yeah, so they went a way to close down that particular agency. So one of the things we did in that agency was we ran what we called a lost receipts policy. So we wanted to do an empowerment process. So if you think about it, if you're going to run a meeting and you need tea, coffee and biscuits, the standard approach for those meetings in organisations is that someone goes off out of their own money and buys the tea, coffee and biscuits, and then they come back to the organisation and then they claim the cash. That's how that works. Well, we felt that was completely inappropriate for a drug and alcohol service use meeting, because everyone would turn up at the meetings without any cash because they just spent all their cash on their drink and their drugs. They don't have money. So we would give them the £5 and send them off and come back with the tea and biscuits. Well, most of the time, and I think almost exclusively most of the time, they come back with the tea and the biscuits, but the receipt might not make it back with them, like, you know. And so we used to just put it down that someone else had observed the tea and biscuits, but the receipt was lost, and we call it a lost receipts policy. And we earmarked in our annual budget, 3% of the budget was unlisted under lost receipts. And they said, you can't do that. It doesn't agree with the local government financial rules under which you've got this small grant to run this service. And therefore, we have to take the grant off you. We have to give it to you, a third sector organisation. You'll have to be managed by a third organisation. And that third sector organisation, of course, are going to claim 10% of the grant in order to manage the accounts. So it went from costing £300 to have a lost, or whatever it was, or to do it becoming £1,000 all of a sudden. It was just effing politics. Basically, find a way to get these people to stop causing problems. Yes.
Gee whiz.
We weren't really very welcome, and we realised we weren't very welcome. Yeah.
So at the end,
and of course, by which time people have started to employ, you know, the people were able to start claiming, well, we don't need this stuff because we're doing it in-house now, despite the fact they're not recognising that advocacy is about independence and accepting legitimate challenge. But it was definitely the recovery stuff that was the longer fertile stuff, and some of the service user forum activity. All of that led to what you now know exists in North Wales. We just developed a threshold of a community, and even today we have that community. So there are, I would say, as many as 20 or 30 of us spread across North Wales. Many of these people have been around for a long time now, like Tony, you know, loads of folk. We all know each other. We've been on the same journey with each other. We've got some real shared values and principles. And still today, we had an event not so long ago in North Wales. You know, it's normal now in North Wales when we want to do slightly bigger events. Everyone understands how to support events that get 50, 60, 70 service users in a room for a discussion, an activity, a consultation, you know. So, you know, huge success in all of that. And combined with that, several people that have been doing what we would call, and we've had 4 or 5 of them over the 15-year period, straightforward peer-to-peer organisations and activities that are then in that other model that don't belong to the service, you know. Yeah, very interesting time. It was incredibly rich, and has left a legacy. Lots of it's left a legacy. you know.
Yes, I didn't realize that, or I'd forgotten about your advocacy movement, in the sense of bringing those groups of people. And you had that 2.5, you said it went on for about 2.5 years, and you got funding, and you were bringing people together for the smaller meetings once a month, and then these bigger meetings. I'd either forgotten or I didn't know about that.
You know, and we loosely used the same label that the UK bit had done, so we called them the North Wales Recovery Academy for a while. But you know, they were just and we were great, and we were very fortunate. We had two at that time. You know, I said to you in all this interview, it becomes really important to remember that sometimes it's important that you have certain people along on the journey. Sometimes people make the difference, like, you know, whatever subtle difference Brunston made at that time, he made it, even if he was very much in the background. And we had, at that time, we had 2 commissioners that really came on the journey, and then a third followed behind. So I can actually say, even though none of them are now operating in North Wales, we had a period when we had three commissioners who were really committed to the cause. We had Katie, who was doing the Criminal Justice Commissioning, Katie Playle. We had a local commissioner called Kerry Ann, who was very committed to the cause and turned up. And later on, we had Vicky, who was the overall. And none of them are there today. You know, Katie's in Berwyn in the prison, and Vicky works in an all-Welsh trauma hub. I don't know where Kerry Ann is, but so yeah, it's very important that you had certain people come on all of those journeys, I think.
The spirit of
community, and a community threshold developed that transcended the services, I think, is the really important thing to say.